If we do not have solidarity on this issue, then that's it. I don't know what else to say. This is the issue. This is the time. It is happening now. We better walk into this together. And I don't care if you're double jabbed, if you're wearing the mask, whatever. Take whatever responsibility you want for your health and do whatever you want with your body that you think is medically necessary.
Do not come. Do not come.
Shame on you, Trump. Seriously, maybe you're not that bright. Maybe Trump's actually a dumbass.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
War is a racket.
Nobody has ever complied their way out of totalitarianism.
Whole segments of the society then, because they're not needed for labor within that profit model, become expendable. And so the end point of capital accumulation under an industrial model, if it's not ended, only has one path, and that path is genocide.
It.
Ace?
Pirate.
Radio. All right, welcome to Pine Pirate Radio. My name is Cash.
My name is Fort.
My name's Seth.
Welcome to episode 7.
Yes, 7.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, pretty exciting. Oh, that's pretty good for only somewhat keeping track. I think it's going to be a very interesting week in terms of discussions.
Yeah, we got a lot to cover. It was a weird week.
A lot happened.
Yeah,
a lot happened in the world and locally, but a lot happened in the world. Well, does someone want to start us off with something?
Okay. So, I think the big two things on everyone's minds right now are the Ottawa protest, the trucker rally, and what's happening in Ukraine with Russia. I do have some other things, but we will. I think Fort's going to talk about the slave trafficking stuff, so I have something to add to that if he hasn't. I'll have it as a topic he's going to cover.
And if there is anything else on anyone's mind at the moment, the mainstream media has failed you. Because those are the only two things they talked about this week.
Yeah, and they have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. They've also failed you, but I'm just more in general.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start with the Ottawa stuff. Where to start with the Ottawa stuff, though?
It was such a fast moving week that I think it was literally like 3 days ago. I was watching one of the live streams and everything was normal, the same way it kind of had been for the last two and a half weeks. And then seemingly overnight, something had clearly changed in the federal government of Canada, and it became crackdown time.
Well, the day after our last recording, because as of that evening we were recording, the Ambassador Bridge was still in operation.
Yes.
We had after we were done recording, we had made mention of like checking the feeds to check because we had suspected that they would have been cleared. Mm-hmm. I did that. I went downstairs. I looked. They were still in operation. Mm-hmm. I went to bed. Yep. They conducted a dawn raid and cleared the bridge. Yes. So our instincts weren't too far off.
Yeah. Ford and Toyota had to get their plants back up and running to make another dozen cars without chips in it.
Yeah, without chips, yeah.
they're gonna sell to customers at a markup that aren't even complete. Yeah, you're right. I remember that because last week we were talking about basically they had started doing the line and basically they started marching forward, but that was the start of police presence is going to be here and they will start taking it. So I believe it wasn't much long after that. It was the next day they basically had the bridge cleared, but they had also essentially cleared every other border protest from what I recall. Was it I want to say Quits. It wasn't as big of a protest, but it was a border crossing block, and that was the first place they made arrests. I think they said they made a dozen arrests over there, and they made some number at the Ambassador Bridge. But so it wasn't even 2 days after that they had forcefully cleared at the very least the border areas. But Ottawa had still been. Well,
it's still being occupied.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not to the extent that it had been previously, but there are still pockets of demonstrators.
And the heart of the Ottawa protest, from what I understand, was still sort of raving. But just absolutely, that has changed in the last couple of days, for sure. And Seth, I don't know what part of it you were specifically wanting to sort of dive into.
I think the police state that they have literally just started. So, I mean, there's so much wrong with it. Essentially, the truckers are terrorists now. And maybe they haven't said that directly. I think they have, but they haven't like directly made it like the definition of terrorist like we would consider it.
There have been people, I mean, on like the CBC, which is their state media outlet, outrightly calling these people terrorists.
Yeah, and they're treating them like that too, because so if anyone hasn't heard, there was a hack for a donation list for everyone who donated to the rally through, I don't have the company down. Was it Give Send Go? As I know, it wasn't GoFundMe. So everyone got hacked. The donation list came out. Journalists were contacting these people. Some of these people only donated like small pittance amounts. So they were doxxed. Everyone was fucking doxxed on the list. And not only that, but the people who were still in the rally, the truckers, since they're now considered terrorists, they are literally freezing their bank accounts, their credit cards, and leaving them SOL.
Right. So this whole story started when the Trudeau government publicly appealed to GoFundMe to basically steal all of the donations that were given on behalf of the trucker convoy. And they did so. They did that on to what GoFundMe did was they said they were either going to refund the money or re-donate it on behalf of the people that had donated. Basically, they were stealing the money, because if they're going to take your money and then put it towards something that you didn't choose to donate towards,
it's basically what happened. There's a slight nuance, but it's basically GoFundMe said, okay, we're going to listen to the Canadian government and we're not going to give this money to the truckers. So refunds are available, but at that point you had to manually go request a refund. And then basically they said, and then whatever's left, we will donate to whatever the people who brought the organizers brought could choose a charity to use.
Yeah, how about the trucker convoy?
Right. Well, so ultimately what ended up happening though was they got so much backlash because still if GoFundMe gave to a charity, they were still going to get their 3% cut.
Right.
And so what ultimately happened was there was so much backlash that GoFundMe said, okay, no, we're just going to automatically refund all of the donations back to the people who gave
I didn't hear that part.
Yep. And then so that's what basically that happened in like a night, right? Like that whole story happened overnight because GoFundMe got so much backlash. And then Give Send Go basically said, okay, well, we're going to host we're another crowdfunding site. They can't tell us what to do. I think they have some foundation in one of the churches.
They can't, and therefore they got the lid blown off them.
Yeah. So Give Send Go is like, don't worry, we'll do it. Then I think they raised like another 4 or 5 million on Give Send Go, and it was at that point to what Fort was starting to get at, like, or what Seth was bringing up as Fort was talking about the government, the federal government of Canada and Justin Trudeau trying to invoke the Emergencies Act, which would allow them to say, it doesn't matter what Give Send Go wants to do, even if they're a foreign company, because we're going to expand our rules to say that crowdsourced funding can be considered in their anti-terrorist funding activity laws. I'm not entirely sure what they define them as, but clearly there was something that they couldn't do anything legally to Give Send Go, so they were going to correct that by basically rewriting the rules in that very moment by virtue of this Emergencies Act. So that's what's led to that was the sort of the catalyst that got them the ability to sort of enact the Emergencies Act. The actual sort of legal, yes, this is stuff you can do, is still being debated, apparently, because they were supposed to hold a vote on whether or not the actual Emergencies Act would still stand.
Yeah,
that got suspended because
that they were supposed to vote on that in the House of Commons. I believe it was Friday, So that'd be yesterday. And yeah, and then they delayed that vote because they said that due to ongoing essentially terrorist or insurrectionist activity around the House of Commons, that they had to delay the vote. They couldn't vote about it. And I can't remember if it's Monday or Tuesday now that they're not going to vote about it until. My favorite take on that whole thing was like, I'm sorry, we've been doing Zoom meetings for the past 2 years.
Oh, right, exactly.
And the one time you need to have a fucking virtual meeting on the literal like policies of the emergencies sort of war act on your own country, all of a sudden, oh no, we'll have to wait a few more days.
Well, it's a way to set the stage, right? It's a way to be like, oh, look how dastardly these truckers are. We're so afraid we can't legislate.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a January 6th. It echoes of January 6th.
Probably gonna wait for all the police to hunt down everybody until they can go back into office.
Yeah, they're holding people, they're arresting people that were organizers of that. So
they've been targeting them for the past couple days now.
Yeah, the police chief actually said that they're going to be treating them like terrorists. That even if they leave now, they're going to still be hunted down. And he didn't say hunted down. And I'm calling it holding them accountable, but what he actually said was they will be found and persecuted.
They're
prosecuted.
Yeah, well, persecuted as well.
They'll have their accounts frozen if they can link them or whatever, and
if they haven't already, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what they're.
So the strategy here is to give them no other choice. But to continue on,
because
that's what you do, and
that's what's happening.
I mean, it's almost like they kind of this is kind of useful for them in a way.
Well, it definitely is. It's literally the
which is go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's it. They get to say and do. They get not only get to write the rules, they get to change them at any time, like a kid playing checkers, right?
Yeah.
Like eventually, when you don't like the way the game's being played, you just flip the board over.
Which is why I'm worried about the trucker rally for the United States now. Mm-hmm. It's like, they're gonna do this, and if they do it and they do it peacefully, I support that. But
I think we've mentioned this before on the pod, but I would be highly skeptical if that convoy ever made it to DC. I don't think it would be allowed within the city limits
if it isn't co-opted already.
I mean, there's always that angle for sure. I mean, it's definitely infiltrated already. I'll tell you that. I mean, there's no way it's not.
If that convoy physically makes it past the Mason-Dixon line, I'll be shocked. Like they will have to stop it before it comes within arm's reach of DC. Like not even arm's reach.
They will mobilize the National Guard to stop it. It will not reach DC. I'll tell you that. Because I just don't think they can allow it. Like in terms of optics, and I guess this is listeners of Pine Pirate Radio, this is a good way to gauge the relative power of Washington. If they don't allow this trucker convoy in, well, I mean, they're able to do that. But if for some reason they're able to finagle their way into Washington, I think that is a good glimpse into maybe how strong the federal government really is at this point.
Yeah, you're pulling the curtain back. Well, I mean, I think that there's a strong point to be made about that, and kind of as a comparison that's already been made or will be made if it hasn't already. If you look at how, the comparisons between a Canadian protest, which they shovel sidewalks and have bouncy castles and music and relatively, if any, violence. There had to have been some amounts of violence, but I don't think it was on behalf of the protesters to the police. I think
it was the police doing it to the protesters.
Yeah. But then look at how America does protest. We literally had to declassify an autonomous zone in the middle of one of our cities. We just gave it up. They were like, we can't control it. So bring that level of protest with even more vitriol, because this protest will actually cross race lines as opposed to the BLM protests, which definitely had a lot of white people protesting.
So one of the convenient things about classifying the Canadian trucker protest as a white supremacist movement is that many, if not most, of the Canadian truckers are indeed white. Mm-hmm. Correct. However, that is not the case in the United States.
Right.
It's much more even split. Mm-hmm. I think it might even be like 60-40 in favor of people of color.
Yeah.
It would be much harder for them to classify it as a white supremacist movement when you have a bunch of Latino and black guys driving their rigs into Washington, which I think is probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that if the vaccine mandate rally that we went to was any sort of indication, it's going to be a significantly more varied group of people that are upset about this than ever expected. And I think that, like I said, the key difference being in the United States, like there's a lot more access to weaponry and a lot more history of revolution that has at least been taught. I wouldn't say historically we've had a whole lot of revolution.
Well,
but
we have a history of revolution.
Right.
So our country was founded by revolution. Canada's just always been.
Mm-hmm.
They were a colony of Great Britain and France. You know what I mean? There's that complicated history right there. You know, eventually Great Britain superseded France or whatever, but they've always been a colony that never rebelled against the higher force. You know, the higher power, and so their politics is one of, you know, status quo, of kind of going along to get along, you know, and Canadians, you know, have a reputation as kind of being a bit of, you know, kind of pushovers. That's not all Canadians, obviously, but like as a national characteristic, that's their...
They've had the most stones of any protesters up to this point.
And I got to say that this trucker convoy has gone a long way towards disproving that notion, I suppose.
Yep. Well, and the what I guess I'll call the American trucker convoy, assuming it does come through, we're gonna have seen all the moves that the government's gonna try to make, right? Like they're gonna try and invoke some sort of emergency legislation, or kind of what I was talking about earlier, like, or they're just gonna leverage policies they already have in place to try and just mobilize a force to stop it. But okay, if let's say there's 100,000 trucks on the way there, they're gonna take a bunch of different routes.
If they're coming from California, the smart move would be to just never drive through a blue state. I mean, once you leave California, you have that option. You just don't have to drive through a blue state.
Yeah, just completely avoid it. Yeah, that's true. They can just sort of just go along the south and then just come up the East Coast.
I mean, they could, you know, leave California, you know, go up through Utah and Wyoming and then loop down, because you have to avoid Colorado.
Yeah.
Colorado's the big one, but yeah, I mean, there are multiple ways they could do it, and they can pretty much, I mean, because almost the entire center of the country is red, and all the way to DC. DC's basically an occupied territory because Virginia's switched; it's a red state now.
Yep.
And I mean, it's still technically a purple state, is what they would call it. But
they've consolidated a lot of their governmental sort of intelligence structures north of DC.
Right.
And
not even in DC proper, so that makes them vulnerable.
Yeah, from the south, Like, what are they going to do? So I don't know. I think it's very interesting, and all
the National Guard is what they'll do.
Yeah.
I mean, and we say that they're vulnerable, but like DC has, I don't know, 3 or 4 major military bases within a 10-minute drive. I mean,
what are the optics of that, though? Right, to probably pivot into to a big conversation that'll come in. If you're Russia, that's got to be like a Christmas morning if the United States mobilizes its own National Guard on its own citizens in protest.
I mean, they've done it before.
Yeah.
You know, was it 4 dead in Ohio? I mean, this is an unprecedented for sure.
Well, there's that. You would talk about the way to unite your allies more to your side, like why are you guys focused on Ukraine? The people that are making you focus on Ukraine are literally like mobilizing tanks on truckers. Like, America has fallen? Like, that's all you'd have to say.
Well, I mean, the hypocrisy is apparent for everyone to see. And you're seeing this. I mean, we were talking about the Canadian protests, but like last week we mentioned there were European protests, especially the Parisian one that one got cracked down on hard.
Oh, did it?
They brought in special vehicles to move the trucks, and you know, they brought in the gendarmerie, which is the armed police. They have like a paramilitary police there. It's a different idea. But anyways, so yeah, I mean, they you know, many people were arrested. I don't think anyone was killed, but there were people who were injured. There were altercations with the police. I mean, Australia, which is interesting, they haven't cracked down nearly as hard, but they did do things like they did phone blackouts so that people couldn't live stream. You know, they blocked the Wi-Fi. You know, these governments are supposed to be bastions of liberalism. The whole idea of a Western democracy is, you know, freedom of expression, freedom of freedom to congregate, freedom to express your beliefs. And well, I guess that all died in 2020, February of 2020.
No, it seems like that governments are telling us that this is for our own good, and we're like, okay, thanks, we don't want it though. And they're like, no, you need it. And then when we say no, we don't want it, they're like, we're gonna make you want it.
Right.
Well,
And this is not government anymore; it's dictatorship.
Yeah, it's tyranny. It's we told you this was for your own good, and you're like, well, who decides my own good? And the government says we do, and so that okay, like that, but that's tyranny.
Yeah, and the people are like, well, we decide who's in with you, right? And the government's like,
not anymore.
no, we do.
Yeah,
and that's the problem. The government decides who's in the government now, not us.
And it's funny because government is a government, not deep state. Deep state's obviously a pretty robust and self-replicate or self-sustaining machine. Government itself is relatively fickle, but it's being propped up by a lot of sort of systems that have been put into place deep underground for a long time. Even if you were to cut all the branches off of the government right now, the friggin' seeds are still in the ground.
Well, it's the idea of like fungal spores, right? So, to get rid of mushrooms, right, you don't just cut off the fruiting body. Mm-hmm. There's this underground layer of mycelium that's barely detectable, but at any given moment can sprout a new fruiting body, right? Mm-hmm. And that's basically government. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's, especially the current systems of power. I don't even know how else you would get rid of it. I mean, like there's the obvious solution. That I don't think we want to talk about because we'll get deplatformed immediately.
Well, I don't think there is any recovering the system that we have, and what's scary is that I don't even think that's a very controversial opinion anymore. I definitely think there are a lot of people that might hope that the system that's in place could be just sort of okay. Well, take out a couple of the bad people, bad quote unquote people, not bad like evil, but people that are trying to sort of take this democracy and turn it into fascist tyranny, and replace them. Just get a few of them out and put good people in, and it will correct itself over time. And I think that I don't think there's that much faith anymore. I think there's still a lot of people who might think that, but I don't think it's the majority of people.
Yeah, I think incrementalism as a strategy is pretty much its old hat. I think there's definitely seems to be a strong whiff of revolution in the air. Mm-hmm. More so than any other time that I've lived. I'm relatively young still, but...
Well, and that's what I wonder, like, kind of we were talking about, war with Russia a little bit, but, like, the 2022 midterms in the United States are going to be a huge, massive swing towards one party without some sort of literal global change. Because at the moment, in the United States, the Conservative Party is like, we don't need to put any claims forward. We just need to keep talking about how terribly the Liberal Party is handling COVID, and that will win us pretty much every election in every state that isn't New York and California. And that that's going to set it up to go the other way. We've definitely talked about that before, but that without either a literal World War III or COVID BA, variant BA.2 becoming the reason no one's allowed to go outside anymore. Is like without that, what happens in the United States? It's going to be a one party government for the next 4 years.
I mean, there will be Democrats in office, but I mean, I think the Republicans have a very good chance of taking both houses. Mm-hmm.
I think it's more than just both.
And they have a good chance of taking the presidency in 2024, but it depends on what happens. We'll see what Joe Biden does, because if he gets us into a war, a lot of Americans are reluctant to change horses, mid-race. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the arguments why, like, I don't know, you guys must remember, like, how hated George W. Bush was. Like, he was not a very popular man, even in 2004, like, because he'd gotten us into Iraq, and there was a lot of people that did not like that choice, but we were already there. And so they found the argument, of not changing leadership in the middle of a war to be a persuasive argument.
Little did we know, 4 years later, Obama would just continue everything that he started.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Well, yeah, you don't want to stop the war mid-war.
I mean, well, like Jimmy Dore always says, Obama had 8 wars to Bush's 2. I mean, he went all out. He went,
Yeah.
Obama, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Barack Obama.
Yeah, he's been one of those presidents who, after the presidency, is literally all the veneer has come off.
Oh yeah.
And he's just like, nah, I just do whatever the fuck I want. Like I served my time. I made all my money. Like, I made all the connections I'm going to need for the rest of my life and my family's life. Fuck it, I'll just do whatever I want, say whatever I want, talk to whoever I want. I don't need to pretend that I'm the president anymore.
Or I don't need to pretend that I ever had your interest at
Yeah,
heart.
that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about just a traitor. Like, in terms of, like, of course, like, he was, I mean, the clues were always there with Barack Obama. I mean, his family, his deep intelligence ties. I mean, there are significant evidentiary tributaries to indicate that his mother literally worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, and that his father may have as well in some capacity.
I'll have to look.
His grandfather was in the OSS. I mean, he comes from a deep intelligence family, and intelligence agents, and intelligence connections tend to travel along family lines.
What do you think are the least progressive blue states?
The least progressive. What do you
so
mean?
So if we have a 50-50 split in the Senate right now, to get a supermajority, you need to have 64, 63 in order to have a supermajority.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a chance that 13 senators, 13 Senate positions go from blue to red?
Yeah, I think there's a definite chance. Well, you have tentatively blue states like Virginia and Georgia and North Carolina. They're kind of on the purple spectrum, but I think they swung blue the last time. There's no indication that they'll continue to stay blue.
Right.
There's obviously like a huge push to turn Texas blue, or at least at the very least purple. That seems to have been absolutely backfiring. The reason is because they don't seem to actually talk to the people who are from these states, and so they think this is like the depth of analysis that Democratic politicians have. Well, there's a lot of Latinos in Texas, so they're going to buy our narrative on immigration. Of course, they're not taking into account the fact that these people actually live on the border, and that many of them would love to see immigration shut down at the border, and you saw that reflected in the voting numbers.
Yep.
Many Latinos voted for Trump.
Yeah.
Right. And this isn't new. I mean, historically, Latinos have been a politically conservative group, anyways. I mean, obviously, like there's a spectrum, in every group. But there have been significant chunks of the Latino or of community that have voted right, especially the Cuban community.
Yeah, well, there's also like a thing to think about, like that now that there has been such a large influx, more than before. The reasons they were leaving was because it wasn't great where they were leaving. Well, then they get to here thinking it's going to be great, and then they find out, well, now so many people have come over here, it's just as bad as where they came from.
Well, and it comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of like who actually lives in Texas. So like you have to remember, Texas was part of the Mexican Empire, was part of the Spanish Empire first, and then part of the country of Mexico. It was ceded by the United States. So the people of Texas didn't move. The border did.
Yeah.
So you have people that have been connected to the land in Texas. They're loyal to Texas.
Yeah.
They're Texans.
Yep.
Their families have been there for almost 500 years. I mean, that's how long people have been living in that area. And to think that they're that these people, they're going to see anyone from outside that area because their families are connected to the soil. This is, and they're going to see anyone from outside that area as an interloper. As it doesn't matter if they're also Mexican.
Yep.
They're not their Mexicans.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's true. And that's what I'm wondering, like, there's got to be enough of this misreading of the actual constituency that they're all doing. Like, I've said this before, like the conservatives they don't often really change their platform. They just stay consistent, and that's proven to be, especially through COVID, a strong enough strategy. Just don't change your message too much, and the politics will change around you. But yeah, if in 2022 we get enough, if the conservatives get a supermajority in the Senate and take the House enough just to get bills sent through, there's literally, like, Biden will never be able to do anything for the rest of his 2 years.
I mean, he's already essentially a lame duck president now.
Yeah, right.
Because most people are assuming that he won't run. And
They're like,
mean,
please don't.
That's pretty terrible. I mean, like, that's the risk you have of electing a man who looks like he's going to drop dead at any moment, you know, and is clearly senile. People are, I mean, from day one, people were already doing the calculations. I mean, I remember when he first got elected, there were literally, like, mainstream press people talking about, well, will he last a year? Will he last 2 years? You know, now it's seeming more likely that he's going to last out his term. And he's talking about re-election. He's talking about, of course, part of that is probably political brinksmanship, this idea that if he admits that he's not running, then, you know, he just cedes all his power. Yeah. But that doesn't stop people from just, like, reading the room.
That only works.
They think it's very likely. Most people think it's very likely that Joe Biden is not going to run again.
Well, let's keep in mind, too, that the Democrats had full control over both the House and the Senate at one point, too, and they didn't get shit done either.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, they don't have a supermajority, though, which is why I think it's interesting.
Obama had a supermajority.
Oh, yeah. I'm talking specifically about with Biden, because right now with Biden, they have a 50-50 split with Kamala Harris being the tiebreaker, so Democrat majority. But that being said, there are still a lot of things, like a lot of the stuff that Biden wanted to do was going to require an actual supermajority, which they knew they were never going to get, which is why they started trying to lump a bunch of stuff together in order to be able to get stuff through in the hopes that they could sway enough to get it accepted. And that's why Manchin and Sinema were able to make the news, because they were selected to be the dissenting Democrats from the majority, just to halt everything, because they never really wanted to get it done anyways.
I honestly don't know a lot about Kristen Sinema, but I know a fair bit about Manchin, and Manchin was always going to do that. Yeah. Manchin has always kind of been there was like a contingent of Democrats. I'm pretty sure I don't know if they still exist formally, but they're pretty much all gone now, but they were called Blue Dog Democrats. Basically, you know how, like, Republicans have rhinos, Republican in name only?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they were dinos, Democrats in name only, right? So they were Democrats that were elected in red states on Republican policies, you know? Yeah. So there's that whole, like, and it's like one of those things that's like, why are you a Democrat at all? Like, and I can never figure it out.
Like Clinton.
But I think with Manchin, it's because of who his donor bases are. It has more to do with his family legacy. These people's like legacy connections as to why they're Democrat or Republican. It has nothing really to do with policy. It has everything to do with fundraising. And
well, clearly it's not, at least not for a lot of people. Or I guess I'll put it this way: the specific example I think of was Donald Trump. Donald Trump was like a well-known Democrat before he entered politics.
Right.
And then once he got into politics, it became clear that things that he was saying aligned more with conservative bases.
Well, think about this though. I mean, Donald Trump primarily, I mean, he's a, you know, resorts guy, but I would say his main areas of business: Manhattan, Atlantic City, Las Vegas. What are those three things in common? Democrats. It's Democratic held states, all of them. So he had to deal with Democrats. That doesn't mean his actual politics were Democrats. He definitely was donating to Democrats. He was definitely ingratiating himself with the Clinton family, and they were ingratiating themselves
it
back.
doesn't hurt to be in good graces with the Democrats when you're doing business in their cities.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, and he was, you know, his Trump Tower right in Manhattan. I mean, and at the time, you know, he's maybe not exactly at the time, but around about the time that Hillary Clinton was senator from New York, you know, and he's hobnobbing with her family and things like that. Of course he would. I mean, she's the powerful person. She's gonna clear away obstacles for him.
Yeah, and be the connection that he needs
to be the president
to get all these things. I wonder if the Durham will come up for us or not. But anyways, that was kind of my point in bringing him up, was like, clearly the line between Democrat and Republican is essentially what base of the public you're trying to talk to, or you think you're going to get the most support from, and that's it, which is essentially like the equivalent of sort of capitalism, but instead of money they're trying to extract from people, it's political goodwill, right? Like, and they don't actually care about you they don't care about their constituents at all. They only care about the votes that they think that they'll get by saying certain words in these certain orders. And so, like, yeah, like Republican name only or Democrat name only is really just meaning like, yeah, what title do you think people will vote you in for based
Right.
off of the groups that they talk to?
I mean, these distinctions become less and less important once you realize that we have a uniparty state.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a left wing and a right wing of one central party that supports, the status quo, basically.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is how wokeism has started to play into that. And like, wokeism used to be, and still is probably to most people, like this notion of a liberal ideal, but they're using very conservative mechanisms to try and like bring it forward. So we're talking about like the military, which is a fairly conservative leaning organization, has really embraced a lot of the wokeism. The corporate corporations and business class have, a lot of them have accepted wokeism and a lot of these things as sort of accepted ideals.
Well, it comes from they were very smart. So like the roots of wokeism come from the hippie radicals in the 60s and 70s. So the hippies, and then they transformed into the yippies, and there were these radicals that were, some of them like literally like in like terrorist groups that were like bombing FBI offices, police offices and stuff. Things that we've long forgotten about that were even possible. Now, I'm not calling for bombings. I'm just saying that we've even, in terms of, what we would even think of as like in political discourse, these things were happening in the 60s and 70s, and these people realized supposedly that they were not going to win against the feds. So one of the ways that they could exert power was by insinuating themselves into colleges of education. So many of these people who came out of these radical leftist groups in the 60s and 70s actually became professors of education and started teaching, so they get into places like Columbia Teachers College and places like the University of Chicago and Berkeley, and they start teaching these, and it's a very slow burn effect. They start to inculcate this this ideology, and then eventually, more and more of these teachers graduate. They insinuate themselves into places of power. They espouse this, and then now they espouse this ideology, and now we're at the point where they're actually holding the reins of power because
We're at the point where a trans woman can take every gold medal in Olympic in collegiate level swimming.
I had that on my list.
Oh, good.
Well, I don't think that had anything to do with them being insinuated into colleges of education, but certainly like the whole idea of like the discourse, right? So they weren't just getting into colleges of education; they were also getting into places like management schools and business schools, and so they insinuated themselves into HR discourse.
Oh yeah,
and they've been able to influence not only the colleges of education, which then trickle out to like the public schools and private schools and things like that, but also the HR departments are the most powerful corporations in the world. And of course the corporations like it. The corporations like it because they see it as a shield from liability. They don't care. Like they don't care in any real sense, but it was sold to them as a way to shield them from losing money, which is,
Well, it's also a way to ingratiate yourself. So I might push back a little bit because the Leah Thomas thing, actually, they had to change the rules to allow it, to allow her to compete in women's swimming, and that wasn't a decision that was that was made on the ground level. That was made by leadership in the NCSWA. I can't remember the whatever the collegiate association that oversees the regulations for collegiate level swimming, and so in order just to get those rules changed, someone had to be there advocating that this should be okay and should be allowed. And not only should it be allowed, it should be celebrated and reserved as like a right, that trans athletes should be able to compete with their, is it the target gender? I'm really bad with political correctness.
Their identified gender.
Their identified gender.
It's not their target gender. You have to understand, like with trans people, they are their gender. They are their stated gender. That's like the politically correct idea around.
Well, I didn't want to call it the transitory gender.
So
no. And I say target as in the opposite of the one that you feel is wrong, essentially, the one that you're that you identify as.
So your birth gender and then your chosen gender.
Okay, so they had to change the rules to allow trans athletes to be able to compete in their chosen genders division.
And then most people would even like a lot of people would chafe at even the idea of chosen gender. They would just say that once the decision for transition was made, then you are a man or a woman, and you always have been a man or a woman.
Yeah. Fort and I had this discussion a couple days ago where, especially with like Elliot Page, we were discussing like choosing your gender seems to break the fourth dimension, whereas choosing your gender makes you always was and always will be that gender.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's trans-temporal, right? Like, so it goes across time.
Which is strange because if you choose a new one again at a later point,
it erases
the previous trans-temporal association, which is so fucking.
Well, and you see like
multiple
how
universes.
Like it brings to mind like like in Soviet Russia, like they were very one of their tactics of so once someone was considered like a traitor to the party, they would erase them from all the records. They would not only do that, they would airbrush them out of official state photos as if they had never existed. You weren't even allowed to acknowledge their existence at all. It was a state crime. And you can kind of see that idea seeping into like trans discourse. And it's a little scary. It's a little scary.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you can't even acknowledge that at one point they didn't identify as a woman or a man.
Right.
Because somehow that is challenging their status as their current status.
Well, you want to talk about status.
Which I don't quite understand. I think it's dishonest in a way. Like, I really do. I think we're a little bit in fantasy land.
I mean, I don't know why Lila Thomas was on the men's swimming team at one point or another. That's really fucking weird for a woman to be on the men's swimming team. But anyways, as a woman on the men's swimming team, she was 462nd. But now that she thankfully is on the right swimming team, she's number one.
Well, I'm
by like a margin of like 12 seconds, by the way,
quite a bit.
Which in collegiate level swimming is essentially infinity.
I can understand why there are TERFs. Right, so trans exclusionary radical feminists. I get it. I get why there are, because especially if you're an old school feminist, right? That has fought so hard to get things like Title IX, passed.
You can just supersede that now whenever you want.
And now a man, a biological man, can ostensibly just declare himself a woman, do nothing to transition. Literally just say, not be on hormones,
grow your hair out.
Not grow, maybe like grow some long hair, not even bother to shave, and say, I am now a woman, and then take and make the fucking world record in your sport.
Even men are better at being women than women are. And
men are better at everything, apparently.
Well, that's sort of the radical sort of notion that's coming out of this, and that's the jokes that I've heard. Like the humor around it is and what's really interesting to me in this discussion is a lot of some of the takes I've seen have certainly been along the lines of like, well, it wouldn't be a problem if she wasn't smashing records, and I was like, it is. I mean, I guess that's true. It wouldn't be as public, but would it still be a problem?
Someone's spot.
Because imagine
you're still taking a woman's spot.
Yeah.
So this is a really delicate issue, right? Like, so like this is a really delicate issue, I think. Like in terms of like, so it gets into the idea of like, do trans people have an inherent right to exist? They do. I mean, especially like, because they're, I would argue it doesn't, your choice to exist as a trans person or your status as a trans person. I mean, you have every right to continue to be that, like there's nothing wrong inherently with being trans. The issue comes when you're taking someone else's spot. If trans is going to be its own category, or if it's going to be its own thing, then perhaps we could have trans athletes or trans league, so you would be
more
be competing.
Representation sounds good to me.
They don't want to do that because it means they have to compete with the people of their same level, and I'm not going to say that every trans person is that way, but to look at Leah Thomas's example, she's very proud that she has taken and smashed these records. She's like very proud of herself.
Yeah, I'm sure she considers herself like a civil rights hero. She's a regular Jesse Owens.
Exactly, and a champion at what they're doing. And all I can say is I don't know what level of sort of delusion you have to have from reality. Nothing to do with the chosen gender, but more the idea that if you take an 18-year-old senior in high school and let them play on the elementary school soccer league, and they start kicking in goals from halfway across the field, you would never celebrate that person, and that person would probably not feel very proud of themselves for obviously being vastly outperforming everyone around them. But when it's gender, we celebrate it as though, well, yes, look at what's happened. This person is so clearly outperforming people in their peers that this is a good thing. Look, it's a leap forward. Well, no, it isn't. In the same way that you wouldn't celebrate that senior playing with a bunch of 9-year-olds, should we be celebrating someone who already had an established record in their sport and literally just took the same level of performance and just brought it into a different league? Like I feel it, regardless of the transitory nature their transgender identity.
Their league transitory.
Yeah, and I'm trying to use the right words, but anyways, I think everyone understands what I'm saying. Regardless of that portion of it, they have gone from a league that they were competing in at a relatively mediocre level and just jumped into a different league without changing anything.
Well, you can kind of see where the incentive comes from, right?
Right.
Like you can, I mean, it's not a mystery. But you can also see where this is like a bit of a troublesome spot, like in terms of like, because if you just equate these people, with like this idea that they're somehow their gender decision is just like an economic one, or like a careerist option. I could see where people would say like this is transphobic. You're a transphobe.
I think.
However, like it's very hard to disagree with the effects of what happened. Like this clearly happened, and this person. It's not like she was an underdog,
right? And
then became the best swimmer ever. She was exerting the same amount of talent, and then just switched teams,
switched leagues, and I think that we talk about nuance a lot, and I guess I'll take that mantle. If that opinion makes me a transphobe, then I guess I'm a transphobe. But I would say I think that we can look at transgenderism in different lights depending on the topic we're looking at.
Right. Like, so professional athletes, I mean,
probably I guess I'm a professional athlete transphobe, and like I have nothing against trans people, but I don't think you can look at that in any sort of realistic or objective light and think that's good, because the same problem would occur if you had a trans league, right? So if you had a biological female transition to male, but she's still competing, or he's competing against a biological male that is transitioned to female, she's still going to get crushed. So like
chances are, yeah.
So the only way to succeed you'd have to have a male a male to female trans league, and then a female to male trans league.
Right.
So now we're going to have 4 leagues.
So essentially, you just created men and women's.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Just in reverse.
Yeah. It's so like it's the weirdest thing ever. And this is what I mean. Like, this is I agree. This is a very delicate, very complex issue, but some like there's the massive fear to have that label of transphobe put on you in that type of situation. And while I agree, you probably don't want to be considered a transphobe, I think the premise that the public would be able to attach that label to, and they would, but like if you were to internalize that, I don't think it's a good label to internalize in that scenario, because just in this, that's no different than taking gender into consideration regardless of whether or not you're trans.
Also, like, it calls into question these people's character.
Yes.
Like,
well,
can you
right.
imagine the type of person you would have to be,
Yeah.
knowing full well
Mm-hmm.
that you're a mediocre swimmer,
Mm-hmm.
and now all of a sudden you're the record holder,
Yep.
and somehow thinking that you earned
Not
that.
having any retrospection whatsoever.
Like,
Yeah.
how is that not self-serving? Like, I just
Absolutely.
don't understand, like, how you think that you, like, did that.
And-
like, I mean, you did. Yeah, I mean, but the thing is like, you just changed pools.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't
Well-
like work hard and like to like get to like
No.
where you were.
Well, and that's why, like, you're talking about turfs, and I was like, yeah, imagine you're a college athlete woman, a female college athlete who has been swimming since high school or middle school or whatever, and in every week or every day or whatever you train, and your goal is to be as fast as possible. So every day you're shaving.
Is to shave off like half a second.
Yeah, milliseconds off your
Yeah.
time. Every time you're just getting a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And so when you push as hard as you possibly can, you wear the super $10,000 fucking high silicone gloss swimsuit that everyone has to wear. You wear the fucking head cap that's perfect, the like Astroglide fucking covered in lube, whatever the fuck they do. They literally, the swimsuits are really actually really important in swimming. You've trained every day. You've eaten exactly the right number of calories
Not
for the
an ounce
day.
of hair on your body.
Yeah, not an ounce of hair on your body. You are as prepared as you can be, and you shave off another quarter of a second off your time because you tried as hard as you possibly can. And some motherfucker comes in and beats you by 14 seconds. What? Are you ever going to want to compete? I mean, like, if you know that there's literally no chance that you're ever going to be able to outcompete this 6'4" fucking monster that's coming through.
So in lots of sports, we have something called weight classes.
Mm-hmm. I don't mean monster in terms of trans, by the way. I mean monster in terms of physical ability.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is why I bring up the weight class thing. That type of person would be in a weight class of other women.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that right.
Mm-hmm.
Who are also as large physically, either that or fat,
Mm-hmm.
which probably not.
I mean,
if they're in
essentially
professional
that would
swimming.
become
Mm-hmm.
that would just become a trans league. You know, because if you're dealing with,
But,
I mean,
but
you
it's
might,
still the women's league. It's just the women's league in this bracket.
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think essentially, especially like once you get into the heaviest weight classes, right? You're just going to have trans women be.
Well, and weight
And,
in
you know,
swimming,
whatever, but-
weight in swimming is isn't as important from what I understand. I'm not a professional swimmer. However, my boss at work, his daughter's big into it. She's going to Junior Olympics, and my brother was a swimmer, so I've heard some stories. But anyways, my brother's a really tall, rather lanky individual. But when he was swimming, the big advantage is like hand size and arm reach.
Mm-hmm.
And if you pair that with a tall person, you get essentially like a torpedo-like effect where they can displace so much water and exert, enough energy to glide them through that, like, yeah, to Ford's point about like size or Seth's point about size and weight class, but Ford's point about you're essentially just distributing. You'd only ever see trans women in that league because not many natural born women get to be 6'4" and that size. But even if they did, they probably still couldn't displace that level of
because they wouldn't have the underlying muscle mass and the years of testosterone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the big thing. Like if you were to have, if you wanted to have it feel adequate, it would have to be someone that transitioned very early in their life. But that gets into a whole different thing, right? Like how early do you let your child start to transition to another gender? Like I think as a society, we're still tackling that problem for sure. But I mean, like, as far as professional sports are going to be the avenue for public discourse on this, because you're seeing what happens if you transition after your physical maturity. Like, yeah, it's not a competition anymore. Not between that individual and everyone else, especially not when they've been training. Like, I guess it'd be one thing if Leah was either Leah or Leela. I think it's Leah.
It's LIA.
Yeah, Leah or Leia had like never swam. and maybe
and then just like got into it or
yeah,
whatever.
and then tried it, and then and they started, and they were just trying it, and they weren't very good, and then got better over time. I think a lot of people would still make the argument that there was an advantage there, but at least it would be a much smoother pill to swallow, I think, than what we have right now, which I don't think anyone that isn't just ideologically married to the notion that the world should bend to the idea of trans people would look at and say, yep, this is the outcome we wanted. Trans people will be the best at everything a woman can do.
I mean, they definitely seem to rise up in women's sports for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the interesting thing is you don't see a similar rise of female to man.
It's very inconvenient for the gender equalists out there.
Absolutely.
It's interesting how you don't see that.
It's very unfortunate.
Strange.
It's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
But
I wonder though, if the female to males went against the same males of the weight class, how they'd fare.
You mean in terms of like?
In terms of anything, in terms of any sport.
Yeah,
soccer or football. Like.
Yep. When I was in sociology class, we had a sociology class in high school. There was I remember one of the teacher of the class essentially made us watch a video about the New York City Fire Department.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was in the mid 90s when they started allowing women firemen to test,
mm-hmm.
take the fireman's exam to become, a fireman. And there was a huge controversy surrounding that because the idea is that, we shouldn't have to lower our standards to accommodate women.
Mm-hmm.
The argument is that they, of course, they got sued. There were women who tried to join the fire department, become
mm-hmm.
firefighters. They found that they couldn't pass the physical exam, and then they sued for discrimination, basically saying that, listen, you have to make this so that women can pass
mm-hmm.
to become firefighters. And then, of course, the argument of the New York Fire Department was, why should we have to lower our standards? If a woman can pass, they pass.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll
I'm
hire
sure there's
them.
some beefy Scottish Irish women who would pass. I know a few.
Well, it's
but
more
the
important
thing
than
is
that.
that I guess there was some great difficulty for whatever reason. So then the argument becomes, well, is this training even necessary? Does this reflect on how effective you are as a firefighter? Whether you can, I don't know. It's like carry 500 pounds of, like 100 pounds of hose up a 10-foot ladder in a certain amount of time or whatever. And it's like, and how often do you actually have to do that on the job?
Mm-hmm.
Can you be an effective firefighter? Can you bring other skills to the table that don't require just lugging hoses?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a complicated question, right? That's also, and that's a question I'm willing to engage with. I think that the benefits that women firefighters bring in terms of like a diversity of perspective, in terms of like women think about problems differently than men. These things, they're probably more beneficial to the organization overall, right? However, when you're dealing with sports, the entire thing is the sport.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So you cannot
the competition.
You cannot lower the standards, or and they're not, to let people in, because then what's the point of having professional sports, right?
I think we'll see a line in the sand when it comes to the Olympics.
Right.
I think that will be the gauge on whether or not this is actually like a real thing, or we're just fucking playing with ourselves.
Well, I mean, these issues are. Do you remember? I mean, this doesn't have to do with trans issues, but do you remember the Blade Runner, Oscar Pistorius? I think his name was. He was a man who had lost. I think he had bilateral BKA, so he had below the knee amputations. Yes. He was a South African man, and he ran on these bouncy blades.
Yeah, which looked like they were springing him and giving him more of a spring power than like a leg ankle tendon would do.
Right. Mm-hmm. So the argument became, okay, so do we let this man race and then have it look like we're discriminating against him because he's disabled? Or do we allow this man to come in with this obvious augmentation that is going to give him that is going to give him perhaps an advantage over people who, don't have fucking titanium blades strapped to their legs, right? Well, they made the decision to let him race in the Olympics. And I think that eventually you'll see trans women doing the same thing.
They'll get in there.
I mean, Oscar Pistorius, went on to murder his girlfriend and stuff, and that really has no effect on his athletic prowess.
A fun anecdote.
How did he murder her with one of his legs?
He shot her and claimed that he thought she was a burglar. That's what he said.
Oh.
He shot her in the face.
It was
the
70s. Never mind, I'm not gonna repeat that joke. Watch Kimmy Schmidt. It's great. Watch season 1 of Kimmy Schmidt. But one point I wanted to talk about, but I did have another thing on the sports. But you're talking about the requirements of the basically the physical test to join firefighters. I think that would be a nuanced issue, but I think if you were to explain it, that most people would probably we probably should have these requirements. So one example would be you need to be able to carry all 75 pounds of equipment that a firefighter has to wear, and also a person.
Yeah.
Because firefighters have to be able to lift people to take them out of buildings.
Right.
Yeah.
But then there's the idea that do the women actually have to be doing that job? Is there a way for them to become firefighters that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be the ones fucking lifting people out of the windows?
Right. But
If they're not the ones fighting the fires.
Well, it's not even not even that. There are other aspects to
they can drive.
So
and
imagine your dispatch, right? And you have a call to a fire. And you okay, calling all units at Fire Barn 6. We have a fire at blah 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 blah. Okay, please respond. We probably need 3 units or three engines. And they go, okay. We only have 2 men and 4 women officers on staff right now. Okay, well, send them. Do you want to be in a situation where those people can't actually do the job with the group that they have? I don't know, because the argument would be, well, I mean, maybe in that same situation you only have 4 firefighters because you only get 4 men, and those other 4 women never even tried out.
So for instance, I'm going to use the example of the military. I hate the United States military, so let's just get that right out there. I am not a Navy SEAL fan, but there's a lot of controversy around the fact that most special operations units in the United States military are exclusively male. And the reasoning that the military puts forward for that is that women cannot pass the qualifying exams. They can certainly pass the IQ part of it. They can even pass the marksmanship part, but it's the strength and conditioning part that they really struggle in. That's according to the military. It is interesting, however, that in almost every other country in the world, they do not bar women from their special operations units, especially in Israel would be the most common. Doesn't seem to affect their military effectiveness at all, and honestly I wouldn't care if it did. But you have to wonder how much of institutional sexism that is actually, and how much are they just valuing things that we just attribute to as classically male characteristics, and how much do you really need them, or do we just associate that with the job so much, because it's a historical vestige rather than, just having limited insight and just being rather having more expansive insight, saying, maybe these women would have more to offer to the job than just these 5 or 6 things on a checklist.
The problem you're right. However, it just kind of dawned on me. It's a kind of a never-ending cycle, because what would happen if you were to sort of try and suss that out, and let's say we successfully did, right? And let's say there's firefighter training for men and firefighter training for women, different sort of not to use the word leagues, but different requirements. And so now you get to a point where you have a different set of requirements for someone who would go in the building and try and take people out, and someone who would go in the building or someone who would be on site. Maybe they can man the hose. Maybe they can run the hose.
They can people the hose.
They can people the hose. Now it goes somewhere totally different. They can run the hose or run the truck, or maybe help guide something, but they don't have the physical ability to go in and either break down the door or kick in the door or pull a person out or something like that. But then what happens when you have...
I'm going to just say, have you ever seen a firefighter? you know, in the movies, they're these strapping, muscly people, right? In real life, they're like overweight men in their 50s.
Oh yeah, well it's just like police
giant
officers.
beer bellies, and like, so my point is like half
And
the
that
men that may have passed the fucking physical examinations in their 20s, they certainly aren't passing them now. I'll tell you that.
And I might push back a little bit because small town fire departments are mostly volunteer. If you go to the city fire, like the city of Portland Fire Department's got more than, at least from what I've seen from going to SMCC.
Yeah, they got some strapping
lads. They got some strapping young lads. But I'll absolutely agree. You go to the small town fire department; those guys are not pulling anybody.
But even like, but so for instance, like Goodwin's Mills Fire Department. Let's just like put that out there. Goodwin's Mills Fire Department seems, I mean, it's large. You know, I've met several of the people that work there. Some of them are young. Some of them are 400 pounds. So like, what are we doing here? Yeah. Like, what is that guy going to be breaking down doors?
That guy's not. That guy's probably crew chief, and he doesn't respond to nothing. He drives the engine.
I ain't going up no stairs.
But
my point is that a woman isn't going to throw a gear into the cogs.
Well,
here.
So what I'm saying is that you're setting yourself up for the same argument later down the road when when a woman says, well, why are you now discriminating women into only this job? What if I want to go in the building? And they say, well, if you want to go in the building, you got to pass the go in the building exam. And they go, well, that's set up so only men can go in the building. Well, now all you did is slid the goalpost. So like eventually it's going to get to a point where it's like, yeah, okay, who needs a test? Anyone who wants to be a firefighter can be a firefighter, and then we'll just send anybody into buildings. And it feels like that's it. This is why it's a tough issue, because like I absolutely agree. Even if someone, I think that interest in desire much surpasses physical acuity when it comes to job performance. But how do you find that line? And I don't even know it's finding the line, because maybe you can't find it ahead of time. I think the better question is who's responsible when it does go wrong. And so they say, like, you know, well, we let someone onto the team that really probably shouldn't have been on the team, but we felt like we had to, or we did because of public backlash or whatever. Then the time came and someone died because they weren't able to do what we would have required someone to be able to do. And I think that's the hard part, because you could set everything up ahead of time and it could still go wrong. And then the question becomes, well, do you put it on a tighter restriction, or do you accept the fact that someone died when they may not have had to?
So I know it's a different argument because this is a physical argument, but I'm thinking of a same argument with IQ and like becoming a doctor. Like, are we going to lower the bar if all of our collective IQs drop in the next 10 years for doctoring?
Well, first of all, I mean, I don't know if you've ever met a doctor. Not all of them are that spectacularly smart.
Exactly.
I'll tell you that right now. Like, that was one of the most demystifying things that I've ever encountered, was me going, oh, I could probably do that.
The regular
and then
vain
how
assholes.
horrifying that is. That is literally horrifying.
Yeah.
Like, that's not me going, I'm so smart I could be a doctor. It's me going, I literally could perform the task that these people are doing. Like, in a lot of ways. Like, especially when you take into account like the huge amount of liability shielding they have. So even if they do get it wrong, it doesn't matter. And then on top of, like, because like they're literally never held to account. Like, also the amount of what they would call professional consultation, but what I would call literally just calling up a more experienced doctor and seeing what they would do. They do it all the time, which, you know, is good. Like, if you, like, that's what I'd want them to do. But it's amazing. Like, okay, so you just went through 8 years of school and you don't know, you know, what I would consider probably a basic fact about like what this, like they would, you know, they just, all they do is they just defer to the more experienced hospitalist, which is fine. But like,
I guess to wrap that back to the firefighter argument is, I would hope that they would also do physical tests every like 2 years or something to make sure that they're up to snuff.
Like, I'm not sure what the FDNY does. I'm sure they have something like that.
And I would hope like doctors do the same thing, where
they have continuing education.
Oh, good.
Credits. That's what they're. But what that basically is you get to go to a little conference.
Oh, it's just
you like and you watch like a PowerPoint presentation, and then you sign a paper and that's your continuing education credit. Like that's just like everyone else's continuing education credit.
Yeah, that's every professional license has continuing eds. And at least in engineering and surveying, you have to have a certain number of credits every year. Each basically you get on essentially like a newsletter or usually like a news thing, or they can develop new ones, and by they I mean it's pretty much anyone that can get the accreditation from the licensing board that the material they're putting out can be counted as a continuing ed. But essentially the idea being, and I'll speak specifically to architecture, because the idea being like people come up with new ways to build things all the time. New materials come out and new stuff happens. And so the idea being that, if an architect got their education in 1970 and now they're trying to design a building in 2020 and they haven't really educated themselves other than their own practice in the last 50 years, well, that's probably not great for architecture to have a bunch of that shenanigans going on. But to Ford's point, continuing education credits are only good if you take them seriously, and they're a hassle because usually they're hours long seminars that you have to sit through. And
they're necessary though, I'd imagine, if they're done right.
Well, they're necessary in terms of licensure, but it's just like I think the point Ford is trying to make, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that like if you actually care about what you're doing, like if you care about medicine, you don't need to be told that you need to keep up with what's going on in medicine.
So exactly, and so like one of the things
same thing with firefighting though.
One of the things that dawned.
Don't you want to keep it fit?
Yeah.
I mean, that's true. I mean, you would think, right?
You would hope.
But, sometimes life gets away from you, right? You would also think that like a lot of doctors would be extremely fit and do things like not smoke or be addicted to drugs.
And firefighters
But
don't
look at the statistics.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just as likely to be overweight as anyone else in the country. They smoke, and many of them have drug issues. Yeah. So, I mean...
And firefighters aren't responding to fires
and who should know better than a fucking doctor, right? It's basic human psychology. One of the things that really opened my eyes, like in terms of like, is like I just figured, okay, these people, they get into med school, you have to earn your way to med school, right? You have to, you have to, test, at a certain proficiency. You have to do these things, and I thought, they're going to be in general brighter than your average bear. Like you're just gonna, and I think in a lot of ways that may be true. Like in terms of like, especially once you get into the higher ranked hospitals, like in the cities, and in the Ivy League programs. But there are dozens of MD programs in the United States, and the vast majority of them are not Ivy League. So you can be. And the people who staff these hospitals, like especially the rural hospitals, or even a mid-sized metropolitan hospital like Maine Medical Center in Portland, how the intelligence distribution is more closely aligned, I would say, to any other. Like I would say, I don't think it's especially different than janitorial or culinary or nursing or any other profession that I've ever encountered with. And that was a huge shock to me, like just in terms, because you have like, I guess that was like one of the last things that in terms of like respect for like society and stuff. I was like, oh, well, doctors and, these teachers, they must have gotten there by virtue of and then you just realize, no, these are just rich kids. These are just, like, it's like, these are just rich kids that, were able to get opportunities that others weren't, but they are not inherently smarter than anyone else.
Well, and that's I think the aid portion of the broader point is that the ones who didn't just get it handed to them are the ones that make everyone in society go, holy shit, doctors are amazing, because they're the ones that have the work ethic and the knowledge and the background that once they finally do make it, they take it and push it to the next level. I
gotta say, there are people that are just, doctors tend to group in families as well. So you'll hear people, well, my grandfather was a doctor, and my father was a doctor, and I'm a doctor. And there's those institutional family, with the medical heritage, and they tend to be very good. They tend to. You know, it goes, I'm not, that's not to say that like all doctors are dumb as shit.
No.
I mean, there are some brilliant people, but there are some brilliant people that aren't doctors, that are also in that hospital,
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how opportunity sculpts a person
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, because like even I'll see it, I actually know 2 of the doctors who are residents this year. I went to school with one of them, and then I just know another one just from out in the community. And they're not smarter than you and me. I'll tell you that right now.
Right.
Like,
well, I think the point.
They're not.
I think the point.
Like I knew this kid. Like you know what I mean. Like
I think the point, or not the point, but a point is it's that in any field, firefighter, doctor, janitor, whatever, if you have the interest and motivation to be doing the job that you're doing,
right.
You don't necessarily need to be told to try and do it better. You're gonna try and do it better.
And also, like 90% of any job you learn while doing the job.
Right.
Right.
Well,
like school can only support you. Can only set you up for so much. Right?
Yeah, and there's the reality though that not everyone gets to do a job that they want to or have the interest to do,
or have the opportunity to do it either.
Well, that's right. That's what I mean, right? Like if you that's what I mean. Like if you're in a job that you're interested and motivated in doing, you won't need to be told to do it better. You'll try to do it better. But the reality is, not everyone gets to do a job that they would be interested in and motivated to be doing, and so that's where like. It's sort of like the continuing education thing is almost like an acceptance of that, and they're like, yeah, we're going to get a bunch of doctors that don't really want to be doctors. They're just doctors because they feel they were told to be doctors. They're doctors because they were expected to be doctors, or they're doctors because they're their family of wealthy doctors, and in order to at least give them some semblance of actually keeping up with things, we're going to require them, in order to continue to be doctors, to at least sit through information that helps them be better at their jobs, and hopefully through some form of osmosis that maybe some of that knowledge will stick and they'll actually get better. Like I don't know, because I said the same thing about architecture. I'm like, if you care about building design, you don't need to be told to go sit in a seminar to learn about different ways to put wood together. You're gonna just kind of do that because you're interested. So I don't know, I think it's a almost like an admission that not everyone gets to do the job they want to do, and so they need to try and justify the licensure a little bit.
No, that makes sense.
I think that's what it feels like. I don't know.
That was quite the tangent.
Tangents are our specialty lately.
So let's talk about Jean-Luc Brunel.
Yeah. Let's talk about it.
So Jean-Luc Brunel is a famous.
Famous.
Well, yeah.
How
actually,
famous?
Pretty famous, actually. Famous model scout. Very, very prominent. And he was intimately involved with Jeffrey Epstein. How
intimate?
Pretty fucking intimate, I would say. I mean,
they were fucking the same underage girls.
They had orgies together. That was established. I would say about as intimate as you could get, actually. Was basically Jeffrey Epstein's procurer. Started out as a model scout.
I'm gonna assume he's French.
Yes, he was French. He was originally he ran the New York office of Karen Models, which was apparently a very prominent modeling agency in the 90s. And then he was scouted specifically by Jeffrey Epstein to run a modeling agency called MC2, which Jeffrey Epstein gave him $1 million line of credit to establish. Now, the interesting thing about MC2...
My concubine's number 2.
MC squared.
Oh.
That's what it's from.
Einstein, okay.
Because Jeffrey Epstein fancied himself a scientist or whatever.
Okay. You're just trying to play 4D chess.
Well, I mean, yeah. There's a whole thing about that if you want to get into it. But he was scouted by Epstein as a way for him to procure girls that Epstein found sexually attractive. They started this quote unquote modeling agency, MC2, which was based in Florida. And the whole idea was he was basically using the promise of a modeling contract to get these young girls out of Eastern Europe that were Jeffrey Epstein's type. So like thin, flat-chested, like fair-skinned Eastern
European models. Yeah,
this is the plot of Taken. In reverse, I'm just saying.
I mean,
get him out of Europe, bring him into the territory.
I mean, these things happen.
Yeah. It wasn't a criticism. I was saying, like, it's literally the plot of Taken. That's funny.
Well, it's just interesting because, like, Jean-Luc Brunel's bookkeeper, her name was Maritza Vasquez. She has stated to the media that MC2 wasn't actually a functioning modeling agency, that it was basically a way to steer women to Jeffrey Epstein. She said that. She's literally their accountant.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't actually, so it was a cover. It was a cover for human trafficking.
Did they have any actual like photos to even make it look like a modeling agency?
I don't know how extensive it got. I'm not like an MC2 expert, but like I'm assuming there were probably actually some photo shoots.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the vast majority of the women that were procured for sex trafficking,
Mm-hmm.
and they would do things that are classic to sex traffickers. They get the women into the United States. They take control of their passport. They don't allow them to earn any money. They control where they live, and then eventually, something happens to them. A large amount of the women that were associated with Jeffrey Epstein cannot be located.
Mm-hmm.
So make of that what you will. Either they got sucked into human trafficking in some other way. Maybe they got trafficked by someone else. Who knows? Maybe they were sold to someone else.
And how long they've been doing this?
For years.
Yeah.
I believe MC2 was founded in the early 2000s, but Jeffrey Epstein had been involved in this kind of operations for fucking 30 years or more.
Yeah.
He it's horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we're talking about Jean-Luc Brunel is because Jean-Luc Brunel was arrested in December of 2020. They finally found him. I think they found him in Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like one of the last, I think he got arrested before Ghislaine.
Mm-hmm.
And
so he was extradited? If he was found in South America, they
extradited him to
extraditing
France, and then he's being held in a maximum security prison in France.
Oh.
Particularly a prison where I guess they hold most of their high-profile prisoners.
Okay.
So because of that, you would think there would be extensive surveillance in this prison, and an extensive guarding.
Maximum security.
Yeah, it's a maximum security prison, right? Jean-Luc Brunel was found hanging in his cell at 1:30 a.m. on February 19th, 2022. In a situation that was strikingly similar to how Jeffrey Epstein himself died.
We're gonna find out his attorney's like ex client was also in the French prison or whatever.
I gotta say, if I was Ghislaine Maxwell right now, I would be shitting my fucking pants. I think she may be untouchable, but I wonder if she believes that.
Yeah, how untouchable is it? Maybe it's a message. Maybe it's a warning, right? Like,
and then we'll also find out that his video surveillance stuff wasn't working at the same time. Wouldn't that be crazy, right?
Actually, we literally... Okay, I was going to say. I was like, actually, that's literally what happened. Like,
they're going to pull the same fucking trick again.
Like, but to think about how confident you are in your ability to craft narrative and to steer controversy, that you literally do the exact same thing. As the way they took out Jeffrey Epstein is the way they took out Jean-Luc Brunel. I don't know. Maybe Jean-Luc Brunel did actually kill himself. I mean, he certainly had a lot to feel sorry for sure. And maybe he killed himself before he could be gotten to. I don't know.
You imagine?
But it seems obvious. It seems pretty. There are some indications that he was whacked. One of the indications being that the surveillance tape, the surveillance cameras that would have been looking into his cell, also seemed malfunctioned at the precise time that he killed himself. Which is
weird. It went away for about 5 minutes exactly. I don't know. It's weird. It's so weird.
It's very odd, I have to say. Yeah. And someone who is clearly a malignant narcissist, like Jean-Luc Brunel, someone who really loves himself a great deal,
probably
would not have killed himself, which is my take on Jeffrey Epstein as well.
You know what a malignant narcissist would do, especially if he thought the jig was up? he might make it look exactly like what happened to Jeffrey Epstein, just to make sure that Ghislaine gets the message loud and clear. I'm joking, by the way. I don't think he killed himself. But I think, to your point, I think it's very demonstrable to how confident they are that it's not gonna be that obvious enough to the public at large that everyone's going to recognize it, but that people who are in the know, people who are paying attention, will, i.e., Ghislaine.
And well, I think this was a message to Ghislaine Maxwell to shut her fucking mouth.
Yeah,
basically, it's like, look what.
Especially as the trial's coming up again, isn't it?
So, yeah, they're gonna have to do their retrial at some point. I'm not sure when it's rescheduled.
They still didn't reschedule yet.
So, so that's interesting. So, I mean, the three major people that were involved in this trafficking ring, Jean-Luc Brunel, Jeffrey Epstein, and Ghislaine Maxwell, 2 of the 3 are now dead.
Same way.
Prince Andrew just paid out a huge settlement to Virginia Giuffre, who is, probably the most prominent Epstein victim. He gave her, I have never heard the number, but 16 million. Sure, that sounds about right.
Yeah, and I think it was because she couldn't sue them for the crimes. She could only sue them civilly or whatever.
It was a civil trial. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was because I think they ultimately decided that because of that agreement or whatever she signed way back when, that settlement thing, she couldn't actually name him as a perpetrator of the sex crimes. But she was able to.
She signed like an NDA at one point?
No, at some point.
She did sign an NDA.
Well, NDA, but I think that there was. I'll have to go look to try and remember.
Because there was a previous settlement that she had reached with Jeffrey Epstein before.
Well, there was. Or
his estate, rather.
Yeah, but it was to say, like, she couldn't name or she couldn't sue anyone else relative, like any other potential defendants or whatever in that case. Now, that being said, maybe she did. Maybe that the judge did overrule that because it was worded kind of weird. It was like basically part of the settlement. It was like, yeah, you agree to not hold civilly liable or hold legally liable or bring charges against anyone else who may any other defendants named or otherwise that were perpetrated the crimes. And
right.
So it was very vague, but.
That was also like part of the sweetheart deal that Jeffrey Epstein had negotiated when he was originally charged for sleeping with like a 13-year-old or something like that in Florida. He part of the terms of the deal was that the federal government couldn't go after anyone who is either stated or unstated. So basically, anyone who was proven to have been involved with this trafficking ring, they could not bring federal charges against. So not only did Jeffrey Epstein arranged a great deal for himself, he somehow managed to deal on behalf of hundreds of people. This is like unheard of.
Yeah, that's
like in
sweet.
terms, I mean, and Alex Acosta, the man who helped negotiate the deal and then later would go on to become Trump's labor secretary, I mean, openly admitted that people had indicated to him that Jeffrey Epstein was intelligence. So there's no way the DA's office would have negotiated this without thinking that they were doing some sort of a favor for an intelligence agency, probably the CIA.
Yeah, no, it's always a bad sign when something like that, like a pedophile ring, is literally being protected by the state. I mean, knowingly or otherwise, it's still a very bad look.
I just want to point out that we talk about Epstein, but it's not the only example of this. This goes back years and years and years, and there are many verified pedophile rings, human trafficking rings, you name it, that have been actively abetted by the United States government, and specifically their intelligence agencies.
Yeah, in the name of intelligence gathering.
Well, and I don't want to say it's like the last frontier as though it is a frontier to ever be conquered, but like pedophilia is like the last crime that I would say that there isn't any that is still publicly not accepted to be okay.
Right,
like,
they're working on that. Don't worry.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, that's what it's the final frontier, and that they're working on it for sure. But basically saying like I obviously don't agree that it should be, but I do think that throughout history we found a way to justify in one way or another the state's crimes any of the state's crimes with the exception of pedophilia. Like, we can justify war, we can justify stealing from the citizens, we can justify apparently now, according topically, we can justify vilifying political dissidents. We've never been able to justify pedophilia. Like it has happened, everyone understands it happens, but there's still a reason it has to be kept under wraps, because the public, that's still something that the public at large would not accept it if they found out that the government was complicit in child trafficking.
I mean, in part of it, they're protecting class interests. So like the government. So when you're so rich that you can pretty much do anything and buy anything you want, what becomes valuable are novel experiences. And for a certain person with certain proclivities, especially like that tends towards the sadistic, I think there's some value in the experience of having sex with a child.
Well, that's when
for
you know
them.
you have too much money and there's too much money that exists.
So, and where there's a demand, people will fill that demand. And I think certain intelligence agencies, if not all of them, are involved in covering for that, because they, in exchange for this terrible act, they feel they probably gain some sort of leverage over people, blackmail opportunities, or they're, whatever else they're able to get from these people in return for literally the worst thing you could ever do to someone.
Yeah, and then the other, it's not an extension, because I would definitely make the argument that pedophilia is way worse. But like the drinking of children's blood, like trying to actually imbibe youth back into yourself through experimentation on children, that's
paging
like
Peter Thiel.
Yeah, like that's the I have too much money type of problem in a nutshell, right?
Like the Nazi shit.
Yeah, you got to focus on other ways to.
But like, where did the Nazis get this idea? Right, it comes from the occult circles. These are like occult sciences. These underground, there was a very, very fertile occult and secret society underground in Germany at the time, in Europe at the time, and a lot of these ideas were found there, and then they just were made explicit through Nazi policy. But that's where they found their inspiration, and those ideas never went away. They're still adopted by many people who are in power.
And that's why we need complete freedom of speech, so that these people can have a voice in the common parlance, even if they're wrong and morally abhorrent. We want that so that they don't go underground, form these communities.
Yeah, you can identify them.
Yeah.
You don't have these like underground hidden communities of these freaks.
Yeah, well,
they're like drinking the blood of toddlers just to feel something because they can't anymore.
I think we've justified everything. Like, I bet you most people, if you said it, because it will come out, like that COVID-19 was a orchestrated, not just in the United States government, but it was I would make the argument it was a globally orchestrated, essentially globalist plot to.
It was a long journey, but
to implement,
but cash got there
to implement a lot of control measures and all this other stuff. But I think most people, even if you were to tell them that, if they could get past the original notion of it, they would probably be like, that's shocked. But also, given the state of affairs, I could see that being.
But think about how evil you have to be, or to facilitate something like that on such a grand scale.
Yeah.
I mean, the ruining of hundreds of thousands of lives. I mean, the outright taking of hundreds of thousands of lives. The ruining of millions.
Yeah. And my point being, like, that the people would still take that and be like, okay, it's a stretch, but I could see that being true. If you were to tell people that there was a globalist push to sort of route children to very wealthy, rich billionaires that is being orchestrated by governments, they'd be like, no.
It's a bridge too far.
That's too far.
Yeah.
But it also happens to be the last bridge. Like, how do you get worse than that? And we'll find out at some point. The year is still young, but at some point, right? Like, that's the final frontier in terms of what the public would accept from crimes of a government, and I think that's why there's such a push on.
Well, I think
this
it's gone so far. I guess that's the bridge too far thing. It's so far past the realm of common possibilities that if we believe that,
What does that tell you about the world?
What does that tell us about the world?
Do you know what that tells you about the world?
The lid
that
off.
tells you that evil actually exists, that it's a potent force in the world.
And we can't be just sitting by and letting it happen.
And I think most people would prefer not to believe it, because if it were true, it's a call to action.
And it's scary.
Because just standing by and doing nothing when you're actually aware of something like this, isn't that also evil?
It feels morally reprehensible to be in that spot, so you just pretend that it's not happening.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, crimes against humanity, which is, like I said, coming out about COVID, like that's certainly one thing. And like I said, I think it's really interesting that we as people could at least justify murder. Like there would be people who'd be like, yep, and I'm glad the government did it. I don't think that there's a whole lot of people that would ever publicly say, I'm glad the government is helping funnel children through a sex trafficking ring to rich people. Like I don't know anyone who would publicly support that. Like people, it's surprising that anyone even acknowledges it. There are very few that do, but I don't think anyone then not only acknowledges it and says, yes, I think this is a good thing.
It's been a long journey, because like the story of Epstein has done so much to like open up this notion to like the public in general.
Yeah.
But like, so these conspiracies have been around forever. I mean, there were tiny indications like during the 30s and 40s. There were different little scandals and stuff that kind of like indicated that some of the elite were interested in these things. There were weird occurrences around child disappearances and things like that.
Right.
However, and you know, and as you get up and through the 80s, you have the satanic panic. You have all these people talking about, you know, you have these kids coming out with these, you know, on the face of it, absolutely absurd stories about like these people, you know, they took us into an underground cavern and they were all wearing masks and I didn't see anyone and they did sexual things to me and they made us drink goat's blood and they killed a dog in front of me, and people were like, okay.
That's where they hire that lawyer from 3 shows ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Start talking about it.
Well, that's literally what they did.
Yeah.
They literally hire the false memory people and be like, well, you couldn't have remembered that, you know, and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, and these things are so absurd, but there's a reason they're absurd. The absurdity itself provides cover for the act. No one is ever going to believe that someone walked into your room dressed like a jackal, disemboweled a goat, and made you eat its entrails. Would anyone believe that? No one would believe.
Rationality, right?
It's like,
well, it's interesting, and especially in this day and age, like we know like eyewitness testimony it's always some of the most compelling, but it's also some of the least accurate. But nowadays we live in the age of cell phones and cameras, and so I think we trust eyewitness testimony even less than we ever did. However, we still trust photos as though they are a 100% factual recounting of what happened.
And you know, in videos, and now we live in the realm of deepfake.
Yeah.
And it would be hard. They'll be able to cast doubt over even the most convincing evidence now.
Right.
And you know, and that's not to say that every account is correct, you know, that
No.
But it's also to say that there are, especially around things that there's particular cases, especially in the case of the Presidio and in cases of the McMartin preschool, there is some compelling evidence that was absolutely true. There was another larger scandal called the Franklin scandal that happened during the 90s, large pedophile ring that was ultimately covered up. And you know, so these things happened before Epstein, but they were widely considered as too outrageous to even be believed. This is like tabloid shit. You know, this is just controversy for controversy's sake. There is no way any of this is real. And then Epstein basically blew it open. And then it's like, oh, so there's a man who lives on an island in the Virgin Islands. He has a temple that's fitted apparently with gutters for some fluid, you know, and you know, all these women were disappeared. He owns a ranch in New Mexico. He owns a genetics lab that he was planning on artificially inseminating all these women with his babies. He was literally running a Nazi race science, trying to run a Nazi race science fucking breeding program.
You would think for such a sex fiend, you wouldn't want to artificially inseminate any of them.
He wanted to just have like 100,000 Jeffrey Epsteins out there.
I know. I guess what I'm saying, I think he could just do it the way he was trafficking humans.
I don't know exactly what he was doing.
Maybe it wasn't.
but-
Maybe it wasn't fast enough. He needed the robots to be able to produce it faster.
He wanted 50 of him all at once. He didn't want them spaced out.
I guess so. Maybe that's what it was. Yeah, they need to come out at the same time.
I just think that people tend to underestimate how evil people can be.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
especially when they're given unlimited resources, essentially.
Well, it's strange too. I guess this goes into the nature of evil. These people are blackmailed, so they realize what they're doing is wrong, so much and so that they are held underneath the blackmail and are willingly complicit in whatever they get blackmailed out of.
Right.
So it's like,
Yeah, well, flipping an agent or blackmail is the same thing. It's an incremental process of control because the more you go on, the more you're being controlled. Because what they do is they use the first leverage to get you to do something else
That
even
will
worse.
further compromise you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing. So when you're trying to flip an agent, if you captured someone else's spy and you're trying to get them to spy on the people that they used to work for, well, you take a bunch of photos of you with the spy that you've captured and make it look like they were working with you all along, and then you send them back to their spy agency, their country, if you're talking about politics, and be like, all right, so now you got to start giving us information, or else we're going to show your agency that you hang out with us and they're going to kill you. So then they start sending you, okay, well, they're going to move troops on this day. Now they have you actually feeding them information and photos of you looking like you're giving them information. So now you're definitely not going to tell, and you're going to have to give them more information. Blackmail is the same way.
Mm-hmm.
It's they catch you. They catch you. Sitting next to an underage girl and maybe a risque uniform on a couch in someone's house.
Well, that's the first photo they show.
Exactly.
But then gradually it becomes more and more clear that they have spicier things.
Well,
on
and that's
them.
assuming you did it. I'm saying, like, let's say they're trying to get you in, and you're like, you haven't actually done anything illegal yet. You're at a house party because, as far as you know, you're there to socialize with a bunch of wealthy people, and yeah, there happens to be a girl, and she's in some weird uniform, and you're sitting, and she sits down next to you on the couch because she's been told to go hang out with you because she's clearly being used to blackmail or whatever.
Yeah.
They're going to take a photo of you in that situation, and let's say you don't do anything illegal. Well, you spend the night or whatever. Yep, normal night. To you, you just had a party, you got drunk, you didn't do anything, and whatever. And well, if you don't play ball, right? If you don't go for the bait, well, then they'll use that original just photo and say, well, do you want a bunch of people in the media to find this photo of you at a known trafficker's house next to a girl? And you're gonna be like, well, I didn't do anything. Well, do you think the public's gonna believe that? Look at this photograph.
Yeah.
And then that's if you don't play ball. I think probably most of them end up having sex with essentially the person that was sent to have sex with them, and then that becomes, to Ford's point, yeah, they have photos or images or evidence of all of that, and that's the cycle.
And we know the United States government ran operations like that.
Mm-hmm.
There was an operation run called Operation Midnight Climax, which was literally...
They're so fucking creative with those
I
names.
know.
Yeah.
It's almost like they literally tell you.
Yeah.
What
yeah.
they're doing.
They're shot calling.
Yeah, they don't even care. Like it kind of goes to this point where like people are like, this sounds like a Hollywood movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Damn
yeah.
it.
There's a reason it sounds like Eyes Wide Shut, which
Yeah.
is like the movie that a lot of people will go to towards like, this sounds like that movie. I saw that, blah, blah, blah. That can't be real. Yeah, there's a reason, because these people are financing fucking Hollywood as well.
Yeah.
You know what? How do you think things get chosen? How do you
And
think?
pre-predictive programming too.
Yeah, and and Stanley Kubrick, clearly had some influence in deep state circles or whatever. Blah blah blah, and and it was his last movie. He died very shortly. He died before it was even released. And it was basically about elite pedophilia or elite sex blackmail, and and these things aren't yeah, you saw it on TV because these things exist. Where do you think these people get these ideas? Like they didn't just come up with it out of whole cloth.
Nothing's new underneath the sun.
Well,
Exactly.
You want to know something interesting? I'm thinking about it, right? So I was doing the scenario in my head, not the pedophilia part, because obviously that's not good. I'm talking more about let's say there is a solution to that blackmailing cycle. And that is, don't have sex with underage women, right? Like that's the
that's
easy
a pretty
solution.
simple
Yeah, that's the easy
solution,
solution.
yeah.
Just don't do it, right?
Don't have sex with the baby.
But
you got it.
Yeah, but let's say like what is the framework that a person would have to have in order to not not do that, right? One would be sort of an inherent sense of morality, right? Like, I know, like you know, you're just, yep, nope, you're not my type. Okay, makes sense. So they're not going to be inclined to do it. Another one would be, you know, someone with religious sort of morals built in, or a religious framework and sort of that guides their principles. And so one thing I was thinking of in my head is like, we've definitely seen a decline in...
Well, you say that, right? But look at what happened to the Catholic Church.
Well, they have their own little set of problems, obviously.
But that directly pertain to child trafficking and child sex.
And in the elite circles. I'm thinking more of the... I guess you'd never end up on Epstein's Island unless you were a member of the some elite circle, but...
Yeah. I think that's a double-edged sword.
I mean, he met the Pope.
Yeah.
He did.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, because didn't they... and he was at the Queen's house or whatever. Like, clearly...
I mean...
Oh, you're bringing... Yes.
I'm just saying, like, you know.
Yeah, I'm not saying that that religion would be a guaranteed bulwark, but you know what I mean? Like...
So, like, someone who would be deeply spiritual, they would kind of, like, you know, cross them out.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, you're right. These people are selected for certain for certain personality types.
Mm-hmm.
They're selected, and the term is kakistocracy, which means rule by the worst, and the idea is the most fit rulers don't get promoted. It has nothing to do with your fitness as a leader.
Ferocity and 1984 shit.
It has, yeah, kind of, but it has more to do with your compromisability. So basically, your willingness to compromise yourself to get ahead.
Yeah.
So basically, you're promoting sociopaths over and over again, because those are the types of people that are willing to do these things.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, you're right. Like they couldn't probably, that would be a very difficult person to target. And so if you were trying to build a resistant, group of people or elites, they would have to have something they would have to have some sort of upstanding moral character, which is exactly the opposite of what we see in our power structure. Right. Which I think is interesting because it certainly plays into both of their hands. Because people who have that ferocity and tenacity, they're gonna like push anyone else out of the way just to better themselves, and also apparently they're going to be more they're going to have a proclivity to just do the thing they want to do in the moment.
Right.
So if you just provide the illegal thing to do, they'll probably do it.
There's also a reason why like the ideology of Satanism is so attractive to people like this, because it literally is do as thou wilt.
It promotes,
right, like, so
it's like pure hedonism.
Exactly. Anyways, on that lovely note, it's probably about time to wrap up.
Hedonists like listening to us talk for an hour and a half. Just pure, unadulterated pleasure.
Wow. That's probably about it. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Fort.
My name's Cash.
I'm Seth. Thanks for joining us. Have a good week.
Yeah, take care.